Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another edition of Budget Magic. So this week, as we wait for Eldritch Moon to drop on Magic Online, we're down to 2 weeks to go, not this Friday, but the coming Friday. We will finally have access to Eldritch Moon cards, which means tons of sweet new standard decks that I can't wait to build and play. We are heading to Modern to check out a deck I'm calling Suicide Black. So this deck is a mixture of a bunch of different things. I've always wanted to build an Abyssal Persecutor deck because that card seems insane. I've tried for months to build a Black Devotion deck, and while this isn't really Black Devotion, I stopped counting black mana symbols, we still get the Grey Merchant, another one of my favorite cards. Plus, on last week's Against the Odds, we learned that Pack Rat is super absurd, and it's less than $2 a card, so I don't know why we haven't done a Budget Magic featuring Pack Rat already. It seems like the perfect budget Modern card. So, altogether, this leads us to a Suicide Black deck in Modern. As you can see, $54 in paper, 22 ticks on Magic Online, so essentially already ultra budget, or close to it. Quick reminder before we break down the deck, if you enjoy Budget Magic and Suicide Black in Modern, take a minute, click the like button, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment. All that stuff is super helpful for the site and the channel. Anyway, let's talk about the deck. So first off, we get 4 Abyssal Persecutors, which is just such a good threat in Modern. I don't know why people never play this card. So yes, technically it has a drawback. You can't win the game, your opponent can't lose the game. But this isn't a really big deal in a Modern Black deck because we have in a mono black deck because we have tons of removal, so we can just kill our own Abyssal Persecutor when we need to. Otherwise, it's just so good against the removal in the format. Being 4 mana means it doesn't get hit by Abrupt Decay. Being 6 toughness means Dismember doesn't kill it. It takes 2 Lightning Bolts to kill it. Pretty much the only thing that just kills an Abyssal Persecutor is a Path to Exile, plus it has Trample, so it can trample over Lingering Souls tokens and Birds of Paradise and other flying chump blockers. So this is our way to just close out the game. We play this huge trampling flyer, attack our opponent until they're negative life, and then kill our own Abyssal Persecutor to actually win the game on the spot. Grey Merchant is kind of our backup plan. I like to think of it as a bad Thragtusk in our deck. Yes, it sometimes drains our opponent and sometimes wins us the game, but we're not a mono black devotion deck. We don't get a Phyrexian Obliterator because it's way too expensive. We're not playing double black 2-drops into triple black 3-drops into quad black 4-drops to power up Grey Merchant. Instead, it drains for 5, drains for 7, and basically acts like a bad Thragtusk, and then it gains us some life to stabilize and occasionally just kills our opponent with the draining. And then we have some discard outlets. This is where the suicide part of the deck comes in. We're not so much hurting ourselves with damage. Instead, we're trying to get ourselves hellbent to turn on some other cards in our deck. So 4 Pack Rats, just one of the best 2-drops, definitely one of the best budget 2-drops you can play in all of Modern. It's a must-kill threat. If it lives 1 turn, it becomes really hard to deal with, and it's a 2-drop that can win the game on its own. Plus, because the tokens are copies of Pack Rat and not just rat tokens or something, they actually have black mana symbols, so they do power up our Grey Merchant of Asphodel. Avatar discard, or Discord, is kind of hit or miss. After playing with it a little bit, I'm not completely sold on it. It's very high risk. The big problem here is it's the opposite of Phyrexian Obliterator. While the 5 power is nice, and if we play it on turn 3 and our opponent can't interact with it, it closes out the game super fast in the air. The downside is we gotta discard 2 cards, and it dies to everything. Dies to Lightning Bolt and Lightning Helix and Abrupt Decay. So there's a real risk that we just 3-for-1 ourselves. So sometimes we hold off on playing our Avatar of Discord until we have cards we want to discard. For example, Call to the Netherworld. This is one of my favorite pieces of the deck. 0 mana madness cost, and it returns a black creature from our graveyard to our hand. So essentially, if we discard a Call to the Netherworld to Pack Rat or Avatar of Discord, instead of discarding a card, what we're actually doing is just returning any creature in our deck to our hand. So it helps make up for the downside of discarding those cards. But we have another reason that we want to discard our hand, and that is our bad Bob. So Dark Confidant is an insane card. Unfortunately, it is also a super expensive card, so it's not something we can really play in Budget Magic. But we can play Asylum Visitor and Blood Scrivener, And these cards, if we're hellbent or empty-handed, they turn into Dark Confidants. Asylum Visitor also has the upside of having an additional power, being 3 power, and it has Madness, so we can discard it to our Avatar of Discord or our Pack Rat, and if we have enough mana, we can cast it with Madness. Blood Scrivener, a little bit worse than Asylum Visitor because it has less power and doesn't have Madness. Although they work well together, they trigger each other. So if we have an Asylum Visitor and a Blood Scrivener on the battlefield, and we get empty-handed from our Pack Rats and from our Avatar of Discord, our Asylum Visitor will trigger because we have no cards in our hand, and we'll draw a card. And then, since we drew a card with no cards in our hand, Blood Scrivener will trigger, and we'll draw 2 cards, lose 2 life, plus draw a card from the turn, so we generate a ton of card advantage with this package. Otherwise, they're just fine 2-drops. They're not insane by modern standards, but they're on curve for 2-drops. And then we play a ton of removal for Gatekeepers. The key thing here is Gatekeeper of Malakir, which you can kick for 1 black. It costs 2 black, so for 3 black mana, you Edict. But it doesn't say target opponent. You can target yourself with this, so we can play this on turn 3 and just kill something of our opponents, make them sack a creature. In the late game, we can target ourselves, sack our own Abyssal Persecutor to win the game by getting it off the battlefield. Victim of Night, same way. We can target our own Abyssal Persecutor, but mostly it's just the least conditional removal spell for a deck that's heavy black and modern. There's not that many vampires, werewolves, and zombies running around in the format. And then a Bile Blight gets rid of a whole bunch of Lingering Souls tokens or Young Pyromancer tokens. And Dismember, just super efficient for what it does. In the mana base, we got some spicy black lands, so a Tomb of Urami. We play this one in Legacy, and I wanted to try it as a one-of. If we can kind of get our opponent out of resources, we can take and sack all of our lands by paying 4 mana and tapping and get a 5/5 flyer out of the deal, which can close out the game pretty quick. So it's another suicidal way to win the game. Leechrin Swamp drains our opponent really slowly. If we don't have anything to do with our mana, we can always pay 1 black, tap it, and drain our opponent for 1. But Jukabog gives us some main deck graveyard hate, and the opportunity cost is pretty low, like we lose an untapped land. But for the cost of having land enter the battlefield tap, we get to have a main deck way to host Dredge or decks like that. And then Ghost Quarters just to have some shot against a deck like Tron. And then just 16 swamps. In the sideboard, we got some ways to deal with non-creature permanents, Duress, Pithing Needle, and Ratchet Bomb. That's one of Black's weaknesses. Planeswalkers, artifacts, enchantments, and all of these cards in one way or another can help deal with those. And then we have Drowned in Sorrow to kind of pyroclasm away the board against elves or goblins or Lingering Souls tokens or Delver decks. If there's a whole bunch of little creatures around, Drowned in Sorrow is a really good way to get rid of them. Bile Blight, an additional copy, also helpful in those situations. Guess Verdict is for decks like Boggles that our targeted removal, like Victim of Night, doesn't really interact very well with. We can take out our Victim of Night, bring in a Geth Verdict to have more sacrifice effects, and then just a single Smother to kill cheap creatures. And then last but not least, Rite of Consumption. This is a uncounterable way to sacrifice Abyssal Persecutor, because sacrificing a creature is part of the cost. Even if our opponent counters it, all they would do would be countering the drain effect of Rite of Consumption, but we would still get to sacrifice our creature, so if we really need to get rid of our Abyssal Persecutor against like a counter deck, Rite of Consumption can do it. It can also just let us steal games. If we get in with Abyssal Persecutor a couple times and sack Abyssal Persecutor to drain for 6 more, that'll close out a lot of games. And that is Suicide Black in Modern. I think the deck looks super sweet. The basic idea is we play hard to deal with threats, like Pack Rat, like Abyssal Persecutor, drain and gain a little bit with Grey Merchant, get empty-handed to turn our bad Bobs into good Bobs, use our removal to disrupt our opponent, and eventually win with creature damage, or sometimes by killing our own Abyssal Persecutor after it does its job and gets our opponent's life total down to 0. So I think it's fun, and it's super cheap, so I'm definitely excited for this one. I think it's going to be a fun bunch of matches. Anyway, that's been our Budget Magic Deck Tech for this week. Suicide Black in Modern. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will talk to you soon.